team in the Arctic rescues a wounded bear cub, but the mother's surprising behavior shocked even then. The wind howled through the wide Arctic region, leaving experts stunned. Dr. Emily Carter was unable to dissuade Jakarta. Hours ago, its whereabouts indicated a deserted research facility that had not been occupied for months as Emily's mind raced with possibilities after 20 years of Arctic travel as she adjusted her thermal gear on board the rescue chopper. She had not been prepared by wildlife research for the mixture of fear and excitement that swirled in her gut. If this story piqued your interest, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Tell us where's Sea Layer in. Observing from David Parker's seasoned ETA of 5 minutes over the monotonous hum of the aircraft, the paramedics yelled his experience in extreme sea conditions made him essential, but even he was unable to conceal the worry in his words. For the third time, the wildlife veterinarian carefully examined her medical supplies, noting that her movements were accurate despite Emily's bond with the Arctic wilderness transcended professionalism despite the helicopter's continuous vibration. Since her first voyage as a young biologist, she had been fascinated by this and had come to grasp it almost mystically. The distress call from the abandoned station sounded intimate, as though the ice were a brutal yet fragile environment. The weather was rapidly getting worse, so the pilot called for assistance in a certain concentration. Temperatures fall below the predicted level, therefore we'll have to move quickly through the helicopters. Emily could see the research station through a glass. It appeared to be undamaged. As they plummeted, Sarah pointed to a strange stillness that seemed to pulse against the gathering storm. She remarked, her voice scarcely audible over the commotion, "Look at those. They tracks in the snow, something in the distance." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she followed Sarah's gesture. "They tracks told a narrative, and they're fresh and unhuman, perhaps unpredictable path." They led toward the station in a state of despair and battle. In contrast to Oregwanov's customary deliberate movements, the chopper landed 50 yards from the station. The team maneuvered with experienced efficiency, securing their equipment and double-checking as the rotors created a tiny flurry. Perhaps 3 hours before the impending storm would require them to flee with or without their communication gear. Without responses, keep in mind that Emily told them as they were getting ready to go, "Lies to any of them together, something was born, and in these circumstances, being apart spells disaster." The cold slammed them like a physical foe. As they got closer, the symptoms of disarray became more apparent as the research station loomed before them, its windows gloomy and unwelcome. More obvious damaged senses, dispersed apparatus, and what appeared to be last-ditch efforts to bind Lou. "Did you hear that Sarah, wearing heavy gloves, unexpectedly grasped Emily's arm during the prior storm?" murmured. The group halted, listening for anything other than the melancholy melody of the wind. The olives killed his bleak and cold cries of agony and terror, fear, love cries of bleeding behind. She was aware that either the cry returned and led them around the perimeter of the station, or what they discovered stopped them. Sufficient, but Emila's breath caught in her throat when she saw the enormous figure in the distance. Sarah Emila remarked, "Mother Bearer is watching them with an intelligence that seems to transcend the natural order." Despite her heart pounds, her voice remained firm. "What are we looking at?" The veterinarian was to evaluate your condition, asking about the emotion through our days. David looked for any internal injuries in these temperatures, suggesting that cub may have an hour remaining without help. His medical expertise is equally applicable to their safety and to any possible mother rescue. But her cautious distancing and apparent waiting style went against everything Emily knew about her sign behavior. Therefore, Sarah decided that Cobb needed the mother's immediate attention and pressed her medical kit, which was already partially open. Bear moved forward a single step before stopping. her dark eyes staring at Emilia with such intensity that it seemed like, as the light faded and the wind swirled about them, Emily decided to communicate in that moment, build up an emergency shelter, and question everything she believed to be true about the borders between people and wildlife. "We are not leaving," she said, her voice bearing the weight of authority accumulated during years of work in this. She turned to her crew after realizing that Cub was going to die, but we were going to do this right. The identical resolve in their expressions indicates that we are going to try something new, require all of our abilities and good fortune. The mother bear stood still. As the sun sank behind the gathering storm clouds, the ice was illuminated by a second, otherworldly glow. Emily couldn't get rid of the sensation that they were going to be a part of a momentous occasion where the distinctions between species would become hazy in the interest of compassion and survival. Yet Sarah worked intensely and intently in the wide whiteness outlining her medical algorithm. "There is breath in the icy air, but since this storm is approaching more quickly than expected, we must act fast," Emily nodded, her thoughts racing through situations that the accepted procedures for rescuing wildlife. "What's your home?" he inquired while observing the doctor perform a thorough visual inspection of the imprisoned cube from in their current position. "The cold is actually helping the bleeding, which appears to be... We must get him immediately, since it is slowing the blood loss, but also raising the risk of hypothermia." Sarah's voice bearing the burden of both professional assurance and sincere care, the mother bear abruptly moved her posture, moving 3 cautious steps toward the gathering. Emily's heart raced because the movement was so planned. This bear's body language indicated something other than the combined conduct that is characteristic of a protective mother. Otherwise, it was pure desperation with a hint of optimism, as Emily put it. Emily said to her teammates, "Look at her posture. She's comfortable. Her shoulders are maintained low and easier. She has required assistance through submissive signals." And Sarah quietly gasped. "Genol of Matsui, this is unlike anything I'd ever seen in my years working with wildlife. It contradicts all we know about polar bears." Umlia bear humped out again. "Bear weakly." The cub cried out again, weakly. The sound tapped into Emily's core, an understanding of mother instinct that went beyond species. "We must attempt it," Emily said in a steady voice, something unconventional despite the seriousness of what she was going to offer Sarah. "David, get your medical kit ready and make sure the shelter is accessible right away. I'm going to make direct touch with Emily. Would do it quite dangerous." David objected. However, his tone indicated that he recognized the legal of story. Emily started to approach the edge of the field with cautious, methodical steps, knowing that this was her cub's only opportunity. She kept looking at the mother while the cub was caught in the ice, taking cautious efforts, and Emily stayed concentrated even though the wind swirled about them, bringing ice crystals that would sting any exposed skin. Emily halted 20 feet away from the cub, and the mother bear regarded her carefully without moving and making herself seem smaller and less menacing in the snow, as opposed to a move that forced Sarah and David to hold their... Taking a deep breath, she took off her outer glove and held her bare head palm up toward the mother bear. Bellied by her immense size, she moved forward a few paces to be closer to the bear's breath. Clouded in the cold air, she bent her head to Emily's level and inhaled Emily's aroma, her nose twitching. Sarah was amazed to see her medical kit clinging firmly to her chest. She murmured to David, who was poised to take action if necessary, as if she understood exactly what we were. Fragile, lovely and fragile, stretched like ice crystals developing in the Arctic air. Incredibly delicate, but the mother bear did something that would alter Emily's perception of the connection for all time. She moved aside to make room for her injured cub between people and wildlife. Then sat down. With her eyes fixed on Emily's face, Sarah Emily said, "Bring your kit." As Sarah cautiously carried her medical supplies forward, Sousa gradually granted us permission. Mother Bear didn't move. "Oh, Emily." The only thing she did was raised and lowered her chest slightly as the cub. David watched as it tested the surface. Emily nodded in agreement, saying that we must make a sturdy route to him using his boot. As the storm clouds overhead became darker and the wind increased in intensity, they were already making plans. Had limited time to preserve this cub, but they had recently received a priceless trust from one of the crew. Started their cautious approach to the injured cub with the mother bear, one of the most formidable predators in the Arctic. The Arctic wind became closer to a mother's love for her child. As Emily and Sarah, every step had to be carefully considered. As they drew closer to the injured cub, one mistake on the thin ice could mean doom for Sarah. David remained in his position close to the emergency shelter, ready to offer assistance if necessary, while Sarah muttered, keeping a close watch on the mother bear in the impending storm. The ice was groaning. Emily nodded, her eyes she glanced the light on right, minor indications of ice solidity, but this circumstance was exceeding her level of experience. The cub was lying in a shallow berry until it sparked and trapped by ripping a leg. Although the cold has actually lessened the bleeding, the mother bear is still exhibiting symptoms of hypothermia. Her brown eyes, which are remarkably steady and follow every movement, are the only sign. She occasionally grumbled softly at her youngster, which was a sign at her distress. With a feeble cry, the child said, "We need to rest." Despite the bitter cold, they started using the lightweight yet powerful device while working with practiced efficiency. To skewer their wings watchable, she launched into bar action. Rescue platforms made for ice rescue while the wind kept getting stronger. Time is growing more valuable as those known ice crystals. The cube observed them with eyes that appeared too perceptive and aware for such a person to risk leaving him exposed for an extended period of time. Emily's knowledge of typical polar bear behavior was contradicted by the patient presence of the young animal's mother. Conditions they would have been assaulted as soon as they got close to the cub would. Instead, they were having something extraordinary. That is poked fire meeting announced that the platform is being tested to stability one last time. Must work from here while I assist David in getting it. She could attack their body by the shelter where we are, and why what we are in blinker, so I wore meds. And they had ready to move with the goods and hurry, moving caution. She was clearly getting worse, with the wind roaring across the ice with greater intensity. In order to prevent some of the wind from getting to her young, the mother bear moved slightly, changing her position. Emma, the rescue crew, would need to coordinate flawlessly in the next moment. Sarah set up her medical supplies. The mother bear looked carefully as her enormous figure, a striking white silhouette against the darkening. Despite the raging wind, Emily spoke to the cub in a quiet, comforting voice. "He'll assist you in maintaining composure for it. Us, those of God's eyes are focused on Emily, and she had a connection that went beyond the laws of nature at that precise instant." Emily started the careful procedure of releasing the cub from its frozen snare. Each motion had to be exact, too harsh. And Sarah remained prepared, since they ran the risk of doing more harm by being too kind and failing to release him from the ice as with her medical equipment as David stayed put, splitting his focus between the storm that was coming and, quite surely with her priceless cargo, the mother bear's endurance was truly amazing. She stayed in the wind swooped around them whilst she periodically made gentle vocalizations that seemed to spin her cub. In the middle of the storm, the bear's presence produced a sort of calm. Emily mumbled she was almost there, her muscles strained from trying to keep such meticulous control in the cold. Sarah and the mother bear tended instantly as the cub let out a little cry of agony. Time appeared to slow down in this critical moment, but there was no panic, simply a common worry that seemed to bring humans and animals together. Every second they spent racing against the impending star, one that would contradict what they now believed to be true about the limits between people and wildlife. After the cub was eventually cleared of the ice, Sarah faced a fresh set of difficulties. Despite the extreme cold, she started her initial evaluation right away, her skilled hands moving with quick precision. The mother bear had stood up, but she was remarkably composed, her intense gaze on her cub speaking many wounds, extreme cold, and maternal devotion. Le prévision is dangerously low, and the wind has increased significantly, transforming the Arctic into a whirling white mess. Even though the shelter was only 50 yards away, Emily could hardly see its outline through the worsening downpour. The temperature was descending quickly, and each exposure minute endangered the cub's existence. "David," Emily cried out. David started marking the safest route right away with high urgia. The mother bear observed their physicality markers as they battled the wind that threatened to throw him off balance. Emily followed their actions with steadfast concentration and makes preparations with an mindful nature in his road. The crew had constructed a customized transport sled that was cushioned with thermal elements to prevent. Bear's reaction was impressive. She backed up a little to give them more room to work while keeping close shade in view. Watching intently as the wind howls about that set height and anyone disappointing exposed skin, the bears hesitated to bring some peace to the storm. The mother bear started to move as Emily and David positioned themselves to steer the sled across the dangerous ice, moving handedly with their course, keeping pace with unexpected grace. Despite her enormous bulk, the ice is becoming more However, if the ice weakens too slowly, the club's condition can worsen, making the trip to the shelter unnecessary. The mother bear's white shape, traveling through the swirling snow like a ghost, bar heart, was the only thing that remained consistent from Bear's feet. Sarah kept working as they walked, doing everything she could to fix the situation and never letting her cub leave her sight. She stated that cub's part, she declared that she is not just ordinary wild animal. Following the rules she had ever learned, we must allow the mother to remain close. She's demonstrating wisdom and David seemed doubtful, but he nodded. So Molada realized exactly what had to be done to assist her cub inside the shelter. Sarah and started putting everything up right away. Her medical equipment was in a small compartment, while David secured the entry. However, the strengthened windows of the shelter provided invaluable protection. Emily observed Sarah starting to examine the cub more closely, her hands steady in spite of the weight of the circumstances. The talk with terrifying. Oh, Tara, good question. You old Afghanics. They participated in a unique event where the distinction between humans and animals became hazy in the face of an emergency room mother's undying love and desperate hope. Sarah worked at the shelter with great concentration and practiced precision with her hands. The tiny animals trembled, but Sarah stayed composed as she carefully attended to the wound. Deep. She claimed to have meticulously cleaned every incision, but the cold actually prevented considerable blood loss. "Now that I'm more concerned about hypothermia," Emily observed from a distance, splitting her focus between the cub and the amazing view of the mother bear via the glass of the shelter. In spite of the enormous animal, every few minutes she would make David remark softly, "I've never seen anything like this," as her cub would respond feebly to her faint vocalization. Emily agreed. The way she's protecting the shelter's heating system is almost like her protecting us. Regarding polar bear behavior, this degree of confidence, this comprehension of human involvement. When he would whimper throughout uncomfortable operations, his mother's thunderous reaction from outside would comfort him right away. Sarah said that after what seemed like hours, his temperature was beginning to regulate. "But we're not out of the woods," but he will require close observation all night long, because the storm's rage did not appear to lessen, and outside their windows, the helicopter would be unable to go back until the weather improved, leaving them alone in this unique circumstance. Emily started arranging their supplies, estimating how long they might live. You mentioned that the shelter's electrical system is stable, but that we should exercise caution and provide emergency provisions for 3 days. The temperature outside dipped even more as night set, adding to the mother bear's whitish appearance. Her determination grew nearly imperceptible in the darkness, only becoming apparent when she passed the shelter's exterior. She never faltered in her stance, shifting between pacing a perimeter of protection and relaxing close to it. They set up a rotation for keeping an eye on the cub and their safety at the shelter's entrance. Systems, Sarah insisted on staying by her patient's side, taking short breaks while continuously monitoring his indications that the young bear's strength was slowly giving back his answers. Gradually, as they got closer, his awareness was growing. The drugs were helping, and he thus studied Hairu's abilities. Despite his wounds and the unfamiliar surroundings, Cub's behavior revealed no dread of them. If anything, he seemed to find solace in their. Emily noticed that he's being influenced by his mother's behavior, which includes her frequent calls through the shelter walls, taking his cues from her faith in us. This transcends the instinct for fundamental survival. Something more profound is taking place here. David, who had been keeping an eye on the weather, joined them by the cub's bedside. The storm is expected to peak at midnight, so we have another 12 hours before any. David's voice causes. The mother bear's shape emerged at the closest window, her breath obscuring the glass as she responded from outside. When she checked on her child, the image was heartbreaking and inspirational, demonstrating the strength of maternal love. Surpassing the borders of species, we should record all of the Emily's even still, she recognized that their variance will disprove scientific skepticism because of the way they're explaining the. Sarah nodded in agreement with. May have been violent in her attempt to defend him, but instead she backed off and watched as the storm erupted. Could things have gotten even worse now? Phil asked. At a tiny island of hope amid the wraths of the Arctic, united by events that could not be explained. Emily saw the mother bear's constant presence outside while watching Sarah tend to the cub. Realized that they were involved in an endeavor that would test the global knowledge of wildlife behavior. While the wind continued to scream, the pre-dawn hours brought about a slight change in the storm's severity. He's healing better than I could have imagined, and the wound sites are clean with no indications of infection, Emily observed. The juvenile bear tried to raise his head and move more forcefully than he had a few hours prior to each tiny sign of progress appeared to strike a chord with the mother bear outside, who would remain vigilant throughout. Over the course of the long night, Emily responded softly as mother and cub made soft noises together, saying, "The voice patterns are more varied than those of a typical polar bear, which encourages him." David, who had just completed inspecting their supplies, joined with more purpose. The mother by the cub's bedside, who hasn't eaten or slept much since we got there. Her commitment is amazing. Emily was profoundly affected by this observation during her years of researching Arctic wildlife. Had never seen such consistent, intentional behavior, and the mother bear's activities indicated a degree of knowledge that went well beyond instinct. She was actively taking part in her cub's recuperation by working with their endeavors in a manner that went against the norms of wildlife behavior. He will require power for the healing process, therefore we should try to encourage him to eat something soon after we need gentle motion. You should watch this via the fortified windows. They were able to witness the mother bear engaging in an unexpected behavior after clearing a tiny patch of though close to the shelter's entrance, giving the impression that there was a place to rest with a view of both. Her activities appeared to be strategically organized, as if she were preparing a shelter door and the surroundings around. The mother bear's white fur turned golden in the early morning, displaying the residue of the night's storm. A lie to her enormous amount of patient strength, and I could truly imagine what Greyra. The team was still in awe of Sarah's brilliance. Her voice cut through Emily's. She said enthusiastically, "Observations? Look at this." The cub had successfully taken his first few nibbles of food. Instantly, they slouched in their dry chair, gasping for breath, letting her mother's words and loving encouragement greeted each succeeding try. The striking synchrony between them was obviously conveyed through the shelter walls. We must record the unshakable link between a mother and her child that went above their current circumstances. Emily stated that her scientists' minds were racing with the implications of what they were saying at every instant. "The cub's trust in our management of your mother's adaptive actions is unprecedented." David nodded, but there was a tinge of worry in his face because the weather report indicates another system sweeping in by nightfall. We must decide whether to try to evacuate or seek long-term treatment. The cub's improvement was encouraging, but he was still far from prepared to enter in the severe Arctic climate. But it wasn't practical to keep them in this shelter, because they must figure out how to cooperate with Mama and Cub in order to guarantee the ideal. Suddenly observed that as Sarah went on, the medical pair is now embracing treatment with oil placed within them, you. Morning light grew stronger, illuminating their tiny haven with a seemingly electing development every second it goes by, and we have produced something truly remarkable. Emily's voice was softly reflected with, "Wonder is a bridge that connects our worlds based on compassion and trust." The cube had started making little chirping noises that none of them had heard before, and this new sound caught their interest. Acknowledgement of the reconciliation occurring with their improbable partners. New obstacles. The cub's growing power was demonstrated by his increased movement efforts, whereas Sarah had just completed changing his bandages when his mother's behavior continued to change in ways that the team found fascinating. She called softly, indicating the cub's response. After noticing something amazing, Emily David, "Come look at this." He is now actively cooperating with the medical care rather than merely enduring the intended act. They watched as the baby bear deliberately moved to give Sarah better access to his wound. It demonstrated a level of comprehension that went beyond simple obedience and demonstrated deliberate involvement in his personality. Emily understood from seeing the exchange that the mother was teaching him about recovery. She literally shows him that we're helping outside when he cooperates by making those particular vocalizations. The mother bear had developed a pattern that would be nearly in tune with their care regimen. She would pace David, who had been keeping an eye on their supplies. The cub was getting better, but the news last caused a nervous environment in the refuge. He wasn't prepared to endure another powerful storm while being exposed to the cold Arctic conditions. His cuts are healing nicely, he's controlling his body temperature, and his appetite is improving, but she took a moment to carefully examine what she was saying. Because he's still really weak and would return too soon to the Vactors may undo all of our work. Therefore, the hug decided to try standing at that precise time. His motions shaky, yet found that his mother's response was prompt, a gentle, and the team marveled as the little bear reacted to his mother's call, took a few unsteady steps before calming down again, and Sarah remarked with excitement that, despite that hyperthermia he suffered, Emily has exactly what we wished to see, that his nervous system is operating normally, went to the window to see the mother bear's body language, and she responded to her cub's accomplishment. Gently, they're both learning to adjust, and this isn't just about survival. Establishing novel behavioral patterns that close the gap between our species. Who knows, Debbie? David had been silently considering their predicament. He proposed that we alter the shelter in order to establish a patient. Her eyes are full of hope that we could draw them closer. Even though it would hasten his recuperation medically, Emily discovered that the psychological advantages alone would be substantial. The mother has demonstrated that she knows boundaries and collaborates with us instead of against us. They started organizing. As they collected things and talked about options, her perceptive eyes followed their movements, the cub detecting the other is defeating people. His vocalizations had become stronger and more confident as he responded to his mother's cries more often. Carrying through, Emily noticed how his mother's calls were changing at the shelter where she kept her vigil. They seem to be creating new means of communication through this barrier that we have put in place. And vocalization style, which is unique to polar bear study, we are not only assisting them, we're seeing how their connection changed in real time as they strengthened the bond between Despite their physical separation, the cub appeared to get stronger, and every little triumph in their recuperation was communicated through a special way of communicating. The structural work as Emily continued to speak with a mother bear who was focused on each. The team's work became more urgent because of the impending storm, yet they couldn't afford to expedite the safety of both bears, and people relied on their precision. Thus, we must preserve the thermal integrity. David clarified as he handled with meticulous care by his skilled hands. The expansion must be exterrupted and Zebel shouldered. Well, he's growing stronger every hour, she said, her voice full of pride. She had changed her stance to observe the construction, as if she realized something important was happening. However, her actions persisted in going against all Emily understood about the habits of polar bears. Rather than displaying fear or hostility due to the changes in her surroundings, she demonstrated patience and what could only be characterized as curiosity. See how she positions herself, Emily muttered, indicating the bear's purposeful moves. She maintained a ceaseless purpose of speed up once more, bringing with it the first signs of the storm that was about to arrive. The team moved more quickly, but the addition took the form of a thoughtfully planned area that would enable Mardan 2 and Cub to be nearer while presuming the regulated atmosphere required for the Cub's ongoing thermal barriers are secure. David declared that I've strengthened the fueling panel and tested the seals one more time, able to physically touch her cub through the protective aperture, perhaps even see and smell it plainly. As she worked through the young bear's replies, she prepared the cub for the change by speaking to him in kind, comforting tones. Her tone had deepened, demonstrating a degree of confidence that warmed everyone's hearts. The truth is, everything we've observed points to her understanding of this goal, but we must be ready with her any spot the moment all the truth emerges. As I finished, the mother outside was keeping up, making close eye contact with the mother bear, as she had done ever since the remarkable meeting with Extension with careful consideration, looking at it from all sides. Her examination was thorough and intellectual, far from the whim way of its domineering nature. When she eventually placed herself in the properly designed area, she conducted the haphazard inquiry one could anticipate from a well-animated group. We designed the area with a grace that embrained her massively thoughts became more vibrant. He found it difficult to approach her, but Sarah guided him to the safe passageway where mother and cub could ultimately feel a stronger bond while preserving the security and medical attention he still needs. Sarah murmured as she observed mother and cub having a private conversation via the floor. Veer had been accustomed to the extension as though she had always known it would exist, her enormous body offering more protection from the escalating wind. She appeared energized, and Emily observed the situation as the cub's movements became more powerful under her cautious gaze. We're no longer merely tending to an injured atom thanks to a combination of professional fascination and profound emotional impact. Considering beats that goes beyond the conventional separated collaboration that I had never imagined was conceivable. The storm's destructive force changing the world inside the shelter, the Arctic scenery. Instead of looking for a better solution, the crew watched as the mother bear presented their redesigned construction with its first genuine test. Projection elsewhere, she pushed herself closer to the extension, forming a second windbreak with her enormous figure, assisted in protecting the region at risk from the storm's wrath. David declared that the reinforcements were keeping an eye on the shelter's structural integrity with great attention to detail. It caused a noticeable improvement in his mannerisms and bodily reactions, and his motions were more assured, and his vital signs are the finest we've seen yet, and his vocalization is louder through their fascinating interaction through the protected aperture. The bears had established a pattern of every few minutes they would engage in gentle conversation that seemed to go beyond their physical distance from one another. Look at this, Emily, who used vocalizations that changed in tone and length to create what seemed to be a sophisticated discourse. When he exhibits symptoms of discomfort while receiving therapy, she calls to her coax. He instantly relaxes upon hearing a rumbling noise, and she is actively involved in his medical treatment, kept rising at wind speeds that were threatening to stifle all other noises. Yet within their reinforced hull, as an amazing instance of interspecies cooperation took place at the shelter, the mother bear's presence had turned into a natural weapon. Her brilliance and intuition, along with their scientific understanding, make her a vital member of their medical team. David cautioned that as the temperature outdoors dropped quickly, they should check their instruments. We're looking at least after perhaps another 12 hours of this, the mother bear appeared to realize the increasing danger as her movements got more decisive. She positioned herself to prevent the worst of the wind from reaching the extension of her with a more deliberate and protective attitude, body acting as a natural shield against the weather and seeing such a strong predator cooperate. Sarah took advantage of the cub's improved mood to conduct a human attempts demonstration, continuing to astound the crew. After careful inspection, she observed that the wound healing was exceptional and softly probed. The rate of recovery in the recuperating region is unprecedented in Arctic wildlife. It's as if his mother's presence and our medical care are fostering the best possible healing environment. The cub, who previously too feeble to raise his head, he now followed Sarah's movements with keen eyes as she came with new bandages. He moved without being asked, showing a degree of cooperation that didn't seem conceivable for a psychiatrist. His mother, a wild animal, saw everything through the shielded aperture, her black eyes displaying intelligence. Emily was pulled to the window, observing as it disproved all of her assumptions about wildlife behavior. The outer world was turned into a swirling white canvas by the storm. She was profoundly affected by the juxtaposition between the mayhem outside their refuge and the concentrated stillness inside this tiny space. A bridge between species based on trust and necessity, as well as an awareness that transgender people surpassed natural barriers, demonstrating evolution in action, she said. Despite the storm's continuous roar, her comments were quiet and powerful. However, they are adjusting to us in the same way that we are adapting to them, forming new patterns of understanding. The mother bear chose that time to illustrate this evolution as Sarah, in an interaction that shouldn't have been feasible. The enormous predator started a series of gentle, rhythmic vocalizations as it got ready for another therapy session. Caught her cub's attention right away, and the baby bear stayed there while being influenced by his mother's soft voices. Completely motionless while Sarah worked on his confidence in people, which now seems to be absolute, Sarah has mastered our routine. She knows just when we need him to be calm, and this goes beyond fundamental, I thought, as her voice filled with awe. While the storm raged outside, this intelligence is active, purposeful cooperation. Their refuge had turned into a testing ground for a phenomenon never seen before in the interplay between humans and wildlife. The boundary between the patient and the caretaker had become hazy, resulting in an inexplicable interspecies cooperation. Instead of making their medical endeavors more difficult, the mother bear's presence was now crucial to their success. Mother and cub were able to stay in continual contact through the protected aperture, their ties becoming stronger even as the windstorm strained their relationship's physical boundaries. It became a metaphor of resiliency and hope, demonstrating that even under the most trying circumstances, collaboration and trust may thrive between the most unlikely allies. The storm peaked at midnight, and the shelter moaned beneath. The constant barrage of Arctic winds, while the outdoor temperature fell to such lows that every creak in the tunnel was crumbling apart. Others fell slowly, holding like a warning. Their focus was split between continuing their exceptional treatment and keeping an eye on the integrity of their refuge mission. David reported that his voice could hardly be heard over the storm's rage. But these key support beams are holding. The more important solar panels in the power generator are critically affected. We're stretching the shelter's tolerance limits because the wind speeds are higher than what it was intended to withstand. Sarah kept her attention on the cub, whose behavior had grown more vigilant in spite of the commotion outside the young bears. Development kept going against expectations, with his reactions to treatment becoming more robust by the hour. Because of the mother bear's continuous presence via the altered extension, a sense of security had been established that appeared to hasten his recuperation, and Sarah noticed that he was finishing another examination of his vital signs, his response to treatment, and how he's adjusting to our presence. As though he knows exactly what we're doing, a particularly strong wind gust shook the shelter, causing the mother bear was adjusting her position and shoving herself through the covered aperture, causing everyone to freeze. The mother bear sighed. Stronger against the extension, her enormous body offered vital defense against the storm's onslaught. Instincts that perfectly align with their technological protections appear. Emily pointed out that her voice was full of astonishment at the way she was arranging herself. She is not merely looking for safety, rather she is deliberately highlighting our vulnerabilities. The reasoning behind her behavior is amazingly the cub was able to sense the tension in the air and started displaying indications of anxiety more quickly than any human could. In response, his mother began a series of gentle, rhythmic vocalizations that caught his attention right away. The little bear's calmness and attention were immediately focused on his mother's figure, which was visible through the aperture. Emily noticed that their communication is incredibly intricate, with each sound seemingly carrying a message, particular meaning tailored to the circumstance. They're developing new behavioral patterns in reaction to bad weather. In these extraordinary circumstances, Sarah exploited the cub's composure. The obvious wounds that had just days before threatened his life were the healing progress when he changed his bandages. Emily walked around the little cabin keeping an eye out. They were already displaying impressive signs of recovery, and the mother bear closely observed the process with her dark eyes. Seeing Sarah's hand movements and learning our medical protocol, Sarah replied quietly, "Watch how she adjusts. Her tone of voice changes according to what we're doing. When I want him to remain motionless, she produces a completely different sound as the storm unleashes another fierce attack on their refuge, this time a hum of energy and sound. When a worrying crack reverberated across the room, David hurried right away to examine the source, his face tight. Mother Bear's response was swift and surprising. She moved to apply pressure to the precise spot where the Emily inhaled, while observing the sound that had come from her enormous body supporting her vitally. Through her intentional activities, the bear is actively attempting to preserve the entire shelter in addition to safeguarding her cub. She knows that despite the fury of the storm, her baby's recovery of the cub is essential to our survival. Yeah. Extraordinary poise. His gaze followed his human caretaker's moves with increasing familiarity, and when Sarah arrived, reactions to their presence had changed from just tolerance to what seemed to be sincere trust. Using his medicine, he moved to make room for her without causing the boundaries between tame and wild to blur. Sarah noticed that she was working not in the sense of domestication, but rather in terms of mutual cooperation and understanding. Despite the fact that they are still totally crazy, they have decided to cooperate with us in some areas. And ready to bed. Hours passed in this odd harmony of human and earth sign collaboration during the storm, which shouldn't have been conceivable. Kept on its relentless attack, but something lovely was developing inside their shell, and the mother bear kept. Her defensive posture alternates between assisting the structure's weaker areas and speaking with Emily. Discovered herself through her cub's distinct language of motions and sounds, recording every aspect of their conversation, certain that what they were seeing would contradict scientific bears' comprehension of wildlife behavior, had advanced beyond their natural instincts, allowing them to adjust to an artificial human presence and the environment in ways that were inexplicable. But there was. The confidence and collaboration they displayed were as genuine and unadulterated as the Arctic wilderness itself, as the storm's rage gradually started to lessen as the first signs of daylight broke through the Arctic darkness. Despite being damaged, the bunker had survived nature's onslaught because of the incredible cooperation between humans, and the mother bear stuck to her station despite engineering and IGN instinct. Even when the storm endangered their sanctuary building, her enormous body continued to brace against the extension. David reported finishing his check as the wind's howls subsided to a more manageable level, indicating that the damage was modest. Manageable report of the first operation. Less than 15 minutes long, Dr. David Stein came to the laboratory. Roar, the reinforcements held primarily because of Sarah, our unforeseen architectural assistance. Roar was nicknamed the kindly and patient watchdog that surveilled the building and refused to do anything to damage the work of artists. Had conducted a comprehensive assessment of the cub's development and the young bear's resiliency during the long night hours. It had been amazing, and every hour that went by, his faith in his human caregivers grew more. Even more intriguing was the way his reactions to therapy had changed, exhibiting a nearly instinctive reaction. Because of their medical protocols, his recuperation has actually sped up during the storm, Sarah declared in a tone of amazement, as though the closer proximity to his mother, coupled with the wound sites, are exhibiting advanced regeneration thanks to the ideal healing circumstances our care generated and his overall health. Emily's strength has greatly increased, and she observed with increasing fascination as mother and cub interacted. They had continued to communicate in a distinctive way throughout the night, creating new vocalizations that were particularly promising. The mother bear's calls had changed to reflect their new circumstances, and they now responded to Emily. Emily noticed that the intricacy of their adaptation in many areas of their care regimen is unparalleled, creating meticulous notes on her observations. They are actively integrating our presence, rather than merely putting up with it, our techniques into their patterns of behavior. The cub illustrated this development by seriously showing Sarah his mending scars, a practice that seemed to be supported by his mother. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as a result of the deep trust that was demonstrated through gentle, rhythmic noises. She muttered softly, looking at the healing tissues. "I'd see anything like this. He is actively participating in treatment rather than merely permitting it, and he observes his mother's reaction each time he cooperates." The mother bear's actions persisted in contradicting their preconceived notions about wildlife interactions. She had stayed in her defensive stance during the storm's harshest moments, but her focus stayed split between keeping an eye on her cub's care and sustaining the building. With an intelligence that seemed to increase with every hour that went by, eyes followed their motions. David reported that the storms had nearly passed after examining their weather instruments, but the surrounding ice field was damaged, maybe significant. Therefore, once we have enough daylight, we should evaluate our circumstances as though realizing how serious. The mother bear moved slightly in response to his comments, giving them a better view of the environment outside their cover. With the first real light of dawn came, the effects of the storm were visible. The terrain had changed under the new strain. Ridges and ice formations encircling their position in a dangerous labyrinth. Emily went to the window to view the altered terrain, raising concerns that the previously planned escape path won't be feasible anymore. We must reconsider how we approach the next stage of healing. The cub, noticing the change in the atmosphere, tried to rise up again. His mother's reaction was that his motions were more coordinated and stronger than before, but they still demonstrated the need for continued care. Now, was instantly followed by a soft rumble that appeared to both reassure and warn, causing him to calm down again, while Sarah observed that their relationship has grown beyond anything I've ever seen him do while keeping an alert posture. Interruption. She is now teaching him how to handle this particular circumstance instead of just protecting him. Every gesture has a distinct meaning. As the morning light intensified, casting a pale glow over their refuge. Golden glow. The white fur of the mother bear became almost ethereal in her appearance. Before dawn serves as a potent reminder of the natural world's ability to adapt and work together, in spite of. The second segment of golden blue that appeared was almost ethereal in its ability to adapt and work together, in spite of. Despite the obstacles ahead, the crew felt increasingly hopeful that we had accomplished something remarkable. Emily softly echoed Wonder's words, forming a partnership that goes beyond the conventional lines separating people and wildlife, regardless of what happens next. This event has altered our perception of how the cub might react. To his mother was still there via the secure aperture, and his vocalizations had evolved to mirror hers. Their connection had developed into a sophisticated discussion in increasingly complicated patterns that appeared to encompass not only their existing circumstances, but also their developing bond with their human caregivers. The complete light of day showed both advancements and fresh difficulties in the altered Arctic environment around their refuge, produced a challenging problem that the group had to work through inside the cub's incredible comeback. But with progress guidance, there was a prospect of coming home to the cub's return. His physical and emotional habitat became more urgent. Sarah reported this morning that the wound healing process had surpassed all expectations. Examination, the tissue regeneration is astounding, and his strength is recovering more quickly than I anticipated. The mother bear might have continued to be around, her behavior changing further as she appeared to detect As the transition drew near, her interactions with the team had become more cooperative, especially when Sarah went to the cub for his morning therapy during medical procedures, and the support of Mia's words after their subsequent phone conversations. The mother bear started what had developed into a pattern of gentle vocalizations that kept her infant quiet and cooperative while they watched this. Emily quietly called her coworkers to let them know that she is actively preparing him for. The level of sophistication in their engagement is astounding at every stage of the process. David had spent the early evaluating their circumstances in the morning. The storm has produced fresh pressure ridges everywhere, and the ice field has been totally reorganized, and our initial escape strategy must be completely re-examined. The cub showed his increasing strength by standing up straight for the first time since being rescued, albeit he was still cautious in his moves. But demonstrating a noticeable improvement, his mother's reaction was prompt and kind. The juvenile bear took a few hesitant steps and regained his balance after hearing an encouraging sound that appeared to convey both pride and caution. Sarah saw the cub's improvement as his motor control improved with each movement and was almost back to normal, professional fulfillment. But he isn't yet prepared for the challenging circumstances outside. We must strike the correct balance. Between assisting with his recuperation and getting him ready for release, Emily went to the window and looked at the mother bear's face. As she kept watch, the presence of the enormous creatures had become so ingrained in their daily routine that it was difficult to recall that she was a fierce predator and one of the most dangerous hunters in the Arctic. But here she was, engaging in a hitherto unheard-of human engagement for the benefit of her cub. The following stage would be critical. Emily stated in a contemplative tone that we must start preparing him for the return to wild conditions, but in a manner that doesn't jeopardize his recuperation. And we require his mother's ongoing assistance to make it function as though realizing the significance of the time the mother bear moved to a new location, where she could make time for the window. Through the window, the bear can reach the barrel. Direct eye contact with Emily appeared to demonstrate a knowledge of the obstacles to overcome and a mutual understanding of the fine balance they had to preserve. Bear started making a different sound than she had before, which made the cub go for his meal with increased interest in what she's teaching him, Sarah realized as she saw the exchange. Every new circumstance turns into a teaching moment that she isn't merely waiting for. He's getting better, and she's actively getting him ready for what's coming up. The cub's movements had grown more assured. With every hour that went by, he moved through the shelter with increasing confidence and curiosity about his surroundings. But there was also reality. It became more obvious, but he continued to respond surprisingly well to the team's treatment and his mother's direction. David stated that we must begin organizing the transition in order to create a special dynamic that connected the wild and human worlds. Creating maps of the surrounding area, but we'll need to exercise even greater caution because of the altered ice field. Stepping outside may undo everything we've accomplished. The mother bear turned to their conversation. Her intelligence continued to astound them, and she seemed to perceive the change in tone, making her ears perk up. Importance of their strategy, shifting her location to better see their actions and observe how she reacts to our attention, and observe that she's no longer just responding to our presence. Instead, she's reading human behavior and predicting our intentions, is more than just basic animal behavior. Today we're seeing something very remarkable as the morning light intensified, creating long shadows throughout. Inside their shelter, the Arctic landscape had changed, and human and earth signs, worlds kept combining in ways that went against what science could explain, despite the fact that their link was based on necessity. Cooperation fostered by trust had produced an afternoon that was unmatched in the area of wildlife protection. Provided a brief period of clear weather, giving the crew their first chance to start getting ready for the difficult change that lay ahead, the cub's development had reached a turning point. His physical recuperation was impressive, but he would need to take caution when returning to the hostile Arctic climate. Sarah reported finishing what she knew, and his final wound check demonstrates good healing due to careful preparation and timing. Would be one of her final comprehensive tests. His mobility and strength have practically returned to normal, is getting better every hour, and the mother bear's behavior has changed slightly as well as her protective tendencies. She had started going on brief outings, which seemed to be part of the planning for their final departure. From her location next to the shelter, she consistently returns with a fresh intent, seemingly surveying their surroundings. Emily's observations of the bear's careful actions while mapping the new ice formations and examining how she tests each new ice, not only is she planning for herself, but she's also making safe paths across the pressure ridges. Thank you for listening. David had been working on altering their equipment to create a transition zone in order to prepare a path for her youngster. protected location that would preserve the cub's natural surroundings while allowing it to experience more open air. We must provide him access to the shelter safely so that he can gradually become used to the new structure, he stated. The cub observed their expanding preparations, and the temperature difference alone might shock his system. Attention, his motions taking on greater meaning as he tested the boundaries of his recuperated strength after his mother showed up at the protected opening. Their vocal exchanges changed to become more urgent and worldly centered. Beyond the shelter, Emily saw that the intricacy of their communication keeps changing, meticulously recording each new vocalization. They're deliberately planning every sound instead of just providing comfort. Sarah had planned what she anticipated would be the direction of their next trip. Sarah had planned what she anticipated would be possible, a warm in truth for the cubs. Gerald felt the temperature drop. Sarah had planned what she anticipated would be too drastic to share with him. Collaboration had grown so ingrained that it was simple to overlook how unique their circumstances were in the untamed Arctic. Given the predator's voluntary participation in human medical care, we must start lowering his reliance on our care. You need all the help you can get. People need people. Sarah mentioned the schedule while gently taking another look at his vital signs before the changeover. Returning to its full natural state, behavior must be as seamless as possible. The mother bear seemed to understand the importance of it. Due to these modifications, she became more visible and spoke more frequently and in a variety of ways via the protected entrance. With her cub-specific cries, she initiated what seemed to be a sequence of educational moments that led to his testing his strength in new ways, and she's taking charge of his rehabilitation, Emily thought as she saw the exchange. At the way she directs his motions and pushes him to reach his boundaries while honoring his recuperation process, Cub responded to his mother's advice with increasing assurance, attempting new moves to test his regained strength, while being closely monitored by his mother and his human caregivers, using a combination of wiles. Before the window of opportunity, none of them had ever seen the special dynamic that was produced by instinct and learned trust. David cautioned, examining their instruments, that the good weather won't stay long, therefore we must take use of this opportunity to... The mother bear's response to their heightened activity was to get us and the youngster ready for what comes next! Exclamation point. Amazingly, she started switching between supporting her cubs' workouts and observing their preparations. As they carried equipment toward the transition zone, she made adjustments with perceptive eyes that monitored every aspect of their job. Her stance to keep a clean distance between both her and their activities, as Emily saw the bears' coordinated movements, were not merely letting them return to the wild, taking part in a transitional event that celebrates their natural instincts as well as the exceptional. The afternoon light created long shadows on the ice, providing a dramatic backdrop for their trust in us. As the shelter was being prepared, the cube kept up his workouts with his mother's help, getting stronger with each step. Compared to the previous one, the human-bear link had produced an unparalleled alliance that honored the human and wild aspects of their common existence. The team had spent the night making final preparations when the moment of transition began in the gentle golden light of Arctic dawn. Preparations, the mother bear remained vigilant, and her actions demonstrated an almost preemptive knowledge of what was to happen. The cub appeared to comprehend the importance of the impending. Alter his behavior with a new goal, and all last-minute medical examinations are, Sarah declared in a firm voice, despite the obvious emotion in her eyes, that his recuperation has surpassed all of our expectations and is prepared for the shift. Zone they established provided a thoughtful transition between the shelter's safe haven and the harsh realities of the David had designed Arctic wilderness, such that it could gradually adjust to the wind and temperature conditions that we have roughly 6 hours to wait for the baby bear while the weather window holds. Cyclops leaned forward in his seat. It was crucial, he thought, that David had designed our trap, he reported, studying their instruments. Of ideal circumstances prior to the arrival of the next weather system, Emily saw as the mother bear started what seemed like to make noises. She would pace particular patterns around the transition zone as part of a purposeful preparation regimen, pausing at regular intervals to produce unique vocalizations, to which her cub responded with growing zeal. "She's not simply Emily," called him immediately, and watched, recording every aspect of their conversation as she made a map of teaches him how to navigate the new ice formation safely. Every sound has a function, and every movement carries information. About the cub's reaction to his mother's direction demonstrated the amazing development of their relationship through his actions, had improved his coordination and purpose, keeping up with his mother's rhythms while being vigilant. Sarah observed that he was combining both worlds as they had taught him during his recuperation. Bear's behavior involves applying the strength training techniques we taught him to his natural motions. It's an amazing combination of instinct and learned behavior, and the time to start the shift came with a... The mother bear made a small change in her behavior by positioning herself near the transition zone's entrance and making a decisive move to enter the hurlyberry raft. The cub's reaction was a sequence of gentle, reassuring noises that had a new sense of urgency. He confidently approached the covered aperture right away, but he continued to glance back at his human caregivers. "Is it Emily?" whispering that her heart is pounding with a mixture of emotional and professional enthusiasm about everything we've worked for, culminating in these final moments. The team had meticulously planned this stage of the changeover. The cub may enjoy the outdoors through the protected entrance while still having access to the shelter's exposed systems. The Sarah was prepared with monitoring equipment for safety, while David kept an eye on the structural integrity of their. As the cub made his initial steps into the transition zone, Sarah reported that his vital signs were solid. The mother bear's patience during this procedure was remarkable, and the temperature changed just as we had planned. Kept up her stance, never hurrying and providing continuous support through their own verbal language. Her cub's cautious investigation of the new area, her actions, showed a comprehension of the fine balance needed for this change, their communication sophistication. Observing their interaction, Emily saw that every move he makes is guided by her cues. Although she's fixated by the cues, it seems as though she has developed a new language that bridges our two worlds by integrating our safety procedures into her teaching. With every step the cubs took into the transition zone, their confidence increased, and their actions demonstrated their strength, helped him recover, and his answers to his mother's calls showed how he and his mother had an unshakable link when he heard. When he got halfway through the transition zone, he stopped to test the colder air while becoming more conscious of his adjustments. "Absolutely flawless," Sarah noticed, keeping an eye on his reactions. The slow exposure is enabling his system to precisely adapt. As she observed her child, we could almost feel the mother bear's pride. She maintained her protective stance while becoming more at ease to demonstrate her faith in both of her cubs as she navigated this new difficulty. Skills and the precautions the group had taken. The Arctic sun gilded the ice in many shades of gold, and Pink's movements had become more assured with each step as he moved deeper into the transition zone. "How is your day going?" His species' natural instincts mingling harmoniously with the meticulous instruction he had undergone during. The mother bear continued to keep a close eye on him during his recuperation, and her direction now centered on getting him ready for the wild, and Sarah noted that his response to the temperature variations is remarkable. The progress of his healing process was slow, fueled partly by his lack of sleep and partly by the academic restrictions he was under. Keeping an eye on the cub's vitals from a distance, each sign indicates that he is prepared for the last transfer. Emily observed the mother-cub contact with a blend of intense emotional and professional fascination. Indeed, their dialogue had developed into something more complex than anything recorded in wildlife behavior. sophisticated language that combined trained reactions to human presence with natural instincts. Observe how she sensed. Emily watched as the mother bear used her paw to touch particular spots while training him to read the ice. By making various noises that her cub would react to right away, she is transferring centuries of survival skills. Knowledge while using what he discovered while recuperating, the cub showed his increasing self-assurance by his actions demonstrating the strength and agility they had practiced while testing various surfaces in the transition zone. So difficult to restore that he would seek his mother's advice when he came across a particularly difficult portion. Their vocalizations growing more precise and sophisticated, incorporating his innate skills. Worlds kept combining in ways that went against what science could explain, despite the fact that their link was based on necessity. Cooperation fostered by trust had produced an afternoon that was unmatched in the area of wildlife protection. Provided a brief period of clear weather, giving the crew their first chance to start getting ready for the difficult change that lay ahead, the cub's development had reached a turning point. His physical recuperation was impressive, but he would need to take caution when returning to the hostile Arctic climate. Sarah reported finishing what she knew, and his final wound check demonstrates good healing due to careful preparation and timing. Would be one of her final comprehensive tests. His mobility and strength have practically returned to normal, is getting better every hour, and the mother bear's behavior has changed slightly as well as her protective tendencies. She had started going on brief outings, which seemed to be part of the planning for their final departure. From her location next to the shelter, she consistently returns with a fresh intent, seemingly surveying their surroundings. Emily's observations of the bear's careful actions while mapping the new ice formations and examining how she tests each new ice, not only is she planning for herself, but she's also making safe paths across the pressure ridges. Thank you for listening. David had been working on altering their equipment to create a transition zone in order to prepare a path for her youngster. Protected location that would preserve the cub's natural surroundings while allowing it to experience more open air. We must provide him access to the shelter safely so that he can gradually become used to the new structure, he stated. The cub observed their expanding preparations, and the temperature difference alone might shock his system. Attention. His motions taking on greater meaning as he tested the boundaries of his recuperated strength after his mother showed up at the protected opening. Their vocal exchanges changed to become more urgent and worldly centered. Beyond the shelter, Emily saw that the intricacy of their communication keeps changing, meticulously recording each new vocalization. They're deliberately planning every sound instead of just providing comfort. Sarah had planned what she anticipated would be the direction of their next trip. Sarah had planned what she anticipated would be possible, a warm in truth for the cubs. Gerald felt the temperature drop. Sarah had planned what she anticipated would be too drastic to share with him. Collaboration had grown so ingrained that it was simple to overlook how unique their circumstances were in the untamed Arctic. Given the predator's voluntary participation in human medical care, we must start lowering his reliance on our care. You need all the help you can get. People need people. Sarah mentioned the schedule while gently taking another look at his vital signs before the changeover. Returning to its full natural state, behavior must be as seamless as possible. The mother bear seemed to understand the importance of it. Due to these modifications, she became more visible and spoke more frequently and in a variety of ways via the protected entrance. With her cub-specific cries, she initiated what seemed to be a sequence of educational moments that led to his testing his strength in new ways, and she's taking charge of his rehabilitation, Emily thought as she saw the exchange. At the way she directs his motions and pushes him to reach his boundaries while honoring his recuperation process. Cub responded to his mother's advice with increasing assurance, attempting new moves to test his regained strength, while being closely monitored by his mother and his human caregivers, using a combination of wiles. Before the window of opportunity, none of them had ever seen the special dynamic that was produced by instinct and learned trust. David cautioned, examining their instruments, that the good weather won't stay long, therefore we must take use of this opportunity to... The mother bear's response to their heightened activity was to get us and the youngster ready for what comes next! Exclamation point. Amazingly, she started switching between supporting her cubs' workouts and observing their preparations. As they carried equipment toward the transition zone, she made adjustments with perceptive eyes that monitored every aspect of their job. Her stance to keep a clean distance between both her and their activities, as Emily saw the bears' coordinated movements, were not merely letting them return to the wild, taking part in a transitional event that celebrates their natural instincts as well as the exceptional. The afternoon light created long shadows on the ice, providing a dramatic backdrop for their trust in us. As the shelter was being prepared, the cube kept up his workouts with his mother's help, getting stronger with each step. Compared to the previous one, the human-bear link had produced an unparalleled alliance that honored the human and wild aspects of their common existence. The team had spent the night making final preparations when the moment of transition began in the gentle golden light of Arctic dawn. Preparations, the mother bear remained vigilant, and her actions demonstrated an almost preemptive knowledge of what was to happen. The cub appeared to comprehend the importance of the impending. Alter his behavior with a new goal, and all last-minute medical examinations are, Sarah declared in a firm voice, despite the obvious emotion in her eyes, that his recuperation has surpassed all of our expectations and is prepared for the shift. Zone they established provided a thoughtful transition between the shelter's safe haven and the harsh realities of the David had designed Arctic wilderness, such that it could gradually adjust to the wind and temperature conditions that we have roughly 6 hours to wait for the baby bear while the weather window holds. Cyclops leaned forward in his seat. It was crucial, he thought, that David had designed our trap, he reported, studying their instruments. Of ideal circumstances prior to the arrival of the next weather system, Emily saw as the mother bear started what seemed like to make noises. She would pace particular patterns around the transition zone as part of a purposeful preparation regimen, pausing at regular intervals to produce unique vocalizations, to which her cub responded with growing zeal. She's not simply Emily, called him immediately, and watched, recording every aspect of their conversation as she made a map of teaches him how to navigate the new ice formation safely. Every sound has a function, and every movement carries information. About the cub's reaction to his mother's direction demonstrated the amazing development of their relationship through his actions, had improved his coordination and purpose, keeping up with his mother's rhythms while being vigilant. Sarah observed that he was combining both worlds as they had taught him during his recuperation. Bear's behavior involves applying the strength training techniques we taught him to his natural motions. It's an amazing combination of instinct and learned behavior, and the time to start the shift came with a... The mother bear made a small change in her behavior by positioning herself near the transition zone's entrance and making a decisive move to enter the hurlyberry raft. The cub's reaction was a sequence of gentle, reassuring noises that had a new sense of urgency. He confidently approached the covered aperture right away, but he continued to glance back at his human caregivers. Is it Emily, whispering that her heart is pounding with a mixture of emotional and professional enthusiasm about everything we've worked for, culminating in these final moments. The team had meticulously planned this stage of the changeover. The cub may enjoy the outdoors through the protected entrance while still having access to the shelter's exposed systems. The Sarah was prepared with monitoring equipment for safety, while David kept an eye on the structural integrity of their. As the cub made his initial steps into the transition zone, Sarah reported that his vital signs were solid. The mother bear's patience during this procedure was remarkable, and the temperature changed just as we had planned. Kept up her stance, never hurrying and providing continuous support through their own verbal language. Her cub's cautious investigation of the new area, her actions, showed a comprehension of the fine balance needed for this change, their communication's sophistication. Observing their interaction, Emily saw that every move he makes is guided by her cues. Although she's fixated by the cues, it seems as though she has developed a new language that bridges our two worlds by integrating our safety procedures into her teaching. With every step the cubs took into the transition zone, their confidence increased, and their actions demonstrated their strength, helped him recover, and his answers to his mother's calls showed how he and his mother had an unshakable link when he heard. When he got halfway through the transition zone, he stopped to test the colder air while becoming more conscious of his adjustments. Absolutely flawless, Sarah noticed, keeping an eye on his reactions. The slow exposure is enabling his system to precisely adapt. As she observed her child, we could almost feel the mother bear's pride. She maintained her protective stance while becoming more at ease to demonstrate her faith in both of her cubs as she navigated this new difficulty. Skills and the precautions the group had taken. The Arctic sun gilded the ice in many shades of gold, and Pink's movements had become more assured with each step as he moved deeper into the transition zone. "How is your day going?" His species' natural instincts mingling harmoniously with the meticulous instruction he had undergone during. The mother bear continued to keep a close eye on him during his recuperation, and her direction now centered on getting him ready for the wild, and Sarah noted that his response to the temperature variations is remarkable. The progress of his healing process was slow, fueled partly by his lack of sleep and partly by the academic restrictions he was under. Keeping an eye on the cub's vitals from a distance, each sign indicates that he is prepared for the last transfer. Emily observed the mother-cub contact with a blend of intense emotional and professional fascination. Indeed, their dialogue had developed into something more complex than anything recorded in wildlife behavior. Sophisticated language that combined trained reactions to human presence with natural instincts. Observe how she sensed. Emily watched as the mother bear used her paw to touch particular spots while training him to read the ice. By making various noises that her cub would react to right away, she is transferring centuries of survival skills. Knowledge while using what he discovered while recuperating. The cub showed his increasing self-assurance by his actions demonstrating the strength and agility they had practiced while testing various surfaces in the transition zone. So difficult to restore that he would seek his mother's advice when he came across a particularly difficult portion. Their vocalizations growing more precise and sophisticated, incorporating his innate skills. Sarah said in a quiet voice that she was amazed that he was flawless with what we taught him. David is not only getting better, he is also changing and growing stronger than he may have been in the absence of this experience. Who had been keeping an eye on the weather, and according to his most recent readings, the window of clear weather is holding. But we must be extremely careful with our timing, because the next system coming from the north might make travel difficult. Meanwhile, the mother bear's pleas to her cub took on a new tone, as if she could sense the urgency of their conversation. A pattern that was more directed and focused, and the juvenile bear responded with growing skill. His investigations are becoming more methodical, as though he were getting ready for a trip. After observing their connection, Emily recognized that she is not only supporting him, but also actively teaching him how to traverse the new ice formations. Each sound and movement helps him get ready to leave. Cub's reactions to his mother's advice demonstrated the remarkable harmony they had established between instinctual wildness and he would meticulously test each new surface utilizing the strength-building methods they had taught him after learning the behavior. Sarah got ready for what she knew would be her last health examination while doing as his mother naturally instructed. Even though it would need to be done remotely, she noticed that his movement patterns now fully recovered. Her speech demonstrates her professional pride, and the way he distributes his weight and tests his equilibrium is exactly as it should be. The mother bear's behavior that kept them in awe, she would show them particular methods. And understand how to measure the thickness of the ice and how to get safe traction in the recently created pressure ridges while keeping her remarkable bond with the human team. Her intelligence and her ability to adjust to their presence had produced something we are seeing. Something that will alter our perception of wildlife that has never been seen before in wildlife life study. Emily meditated on her behavior for all time, recording every aspect of their connection. This isn't simply about physical healing, but now it's about the possibility of genuine interspecies collaboration. The cub went to the outer border of the area when the protected habitat started to blend with the actual Arctic wilderness. Every stride was led by his mother's encouraging calls, but he moved with a newfound confidence that discussed being prepared for the difficulties that lie ahead, and the connection they have with us hasn't lessened their wild. If anything, nature, Emily observed as the cub negotiated a particularly difficult stretch of ice, has improved. When the sun reached its zenith, their innate powers added new dimensions to their survival skills, producing sharp targets. The mother bear carefully positioned herself to make a clear route for her pup as she cast shadows across the ice field. Her actions, which involved keeping eye contact with the team, further demonstrated the extraordinary trust that had grown between them as she got ready for them to go back to their natural habitat. The final grace of an Arctic afternoon, the final transitional moment, arrived. Standing at the intersection of the protected zone and the expansive wilderness, the cub maintained a powerful and assured, quite different from the wounded animal they had discovered a few days earlier. The mother bear stood a little in front of her enormous body, which was silhouetted against the immaculate white. While the landscape patiently awaits her cub's last strides toward freedom, all critical indications are treacherous. During her final remote evaluation, Sarah murmured that his recuperation is perfect. In the presence of her new young client, Sarah managed to pick her way cautiously through it. Finished, he's prepared for this project to be her last, and while she's planned for a while, she feels that the bond between humans and animals goes beyond all scientific explanation. The scene came to life. Mother Bear turned to face Team 1 for the final time, her dark eyes brimming with knowledge and insight that had altered their perception of wildlife behavior for all time. In that instant, the bond between humans and animals goes beyond all scientific explanation. She knows fully what's going on, and her voice is full of emotion. The cub took a few steps forward before pausing and turning to glance back at the place that had served as his haven. His gaze shifted between team members, exhibiting a question without a word. When he vocalized, it wasn't the sound of a predator, but rather a gentle sound that appeared difficult for a wild animal to recognize. Listen to that tone, Emily. It was an almost sweet call that made Sarah cry. Saw rapidly recording these last moments. The polar bear's vocalization is unlike any we've ever heard. He has established a particular method of communication with us, David, who has kept them secure during the time I watched the entire experience with unmasked awe during my years of training. I've never witnessed rescue work like this before. They're not simply walking away. They are recognizing us as the mother bear. Descriptor started making quiet calls, each of which seemed to have a distinct meaning. "I'm back," Cub replied with increasing assurance, demonstrating via his actions the flawless fusion of natural heroism. He was able to recreate each step with the aid of his instincts and power, making sure that every action had a purpose. Sarah watched the gait professionally, even if her voice shook a little. The weight distribution was flawless. His muscle control has actually improved, and he is actually stronger than when we first discovered him. The mother bear's patience during these hours. She waited while observing her cub, demonstrating the remarkable trust that had grown between them in their final moments. Approached her on his own, encouraging her while letting him show off his restored independence. It was a moment of pure beauty when the cub finally made it to his mother's side, and she gave him a tender nuzzle. Their vocalizations became more natural as their white fur blended seamlessly with the Arctic scenery. Or untamed, a reminder that even though they have amazing interactions with people, Emily replied quietly, realizing that it was time to let go of the last wilderness creatures. They must depart while the weather permits. The mother bear appeared to comprehend as she took one last glance at the team, striking a proud and powerful pose before turning with purposeful grace and started guiding her cub over the ice field, and they performed their motions in perfect unison. The researchers observed the newborn bear's full recovery and his mother's skillful guidance in reverent quiet as the bears traversed the altered Arctic terrain, the mother having selected their path. The cub matched her pace while she cautiously followed the secure paths she had scouted during her vigilant watch. With every stride he took toward regaining his freedom, Emily mirrored her strength and confidence. Voice bearing the weight of scientific discovery would permanently alter our comprehension of wildlife behavior. This wasn't. Sarah nodded and wiped away her tears as she watched, realizing that it was only a rescue and evidence of possibilities we never thought possible. Her patient vanished into the Arctic's immensity. They had entire faith in us, but never lost their untamed spirit, which is why this is so remarkable. The bears stopped at the edge of an iceberg. The mother bear rotated one final time and momentarily rose on her hind, their white shape stark against the light blue sky. Her legs, as a last thank you to the people who had saved her child, and then she returned with majestic grace to the team, stood silently, observing the location where mother, cub, and all fours disappeared into their natural environment. The emptiness of the countryside before them seemed to contain the echo of a moment of miracle after the bears had vanished. People were impressed. When the lines between the wild and the human had melted, producing something extraordinary and lovely there, David remarked quietly, "They'll be fine," as he observed the bear's distinct footprints in the snow. She is familiar with these areas, and he is more powerful than ever. Emily nodded, her heart bursting with a feeling that surpasses scientific accomplishment. They had participated in a remarkable interspecies cooperation that demonstrated, my listeners, the strength of compassion, trust, and the unshakable tie between a mother and her child. Your hearts have been moved by this remarkable story of trust, healing, and connection beyond boundaries. Change Dr. Emily Carter's and her team's lives by demonstrating the incredible attachment between a mother bear and her baby and their foundational reality. We are reminded that nature contains mysteries that we are still learning about by their extraordinary faith in their human assistance. For more motivational tales of hope and connection in the natural world, please subscribe to our channel. Please leave a remark below with your views. We'd love to know how this incredible journey of trust and survival influenced you. Remember to ring the bell and like this video to receive updates on more amazing stories. That together, let's continue to question our comprehension of the wild environment around us, examining the remarkable potential that arises when empathy closes the gap between people and animals.